Hello and welcome to our session about Gardenctl version 2, the successor of Gardenctl. So we have three speakers today, so Holger, Peter, and myself. Next slide, please. Okay. All right, so let's first have a glance at the agenda. So first of all, I will give you some background information about the motivation why we started this Gardenctl version 2. And after that, Holger will give some more deeper insights to some of our concepts. And after that, Peter will do the first demo of today, where he will present the main features that we have currently in Gardenctl version 2. And then I will show you how to get started with Gardenctl and also give you a demo about how to get productive quickly. And after that, Peter will talk about landscape requirements for the new Gardenctl version 2 and also give a short overview of what we have planned for the future. Okay. Yeah, so the main motivation to build a new Gardenctl was to have a tool that provides secure access to shoot clusters or to clusters. And for shoots, we now have kube configs that use Garden login as a Kubernetes credential plugin, so that we achieve by this to no longer have credentials in our kube configs. And Holger will give some information how this works on the next slides. For seeds, we also no longer have static admin credentials, and Peter will talk about this in the landscape requirements. Another important change is that we now see Gardenctl as a door opener, as a way to configure the session with the required credentials for cloud provider CLIs and also for kubectl. So we now use you can use the kubectl and cloud provider CLIs natively. So there is no wrapping of these CLIs. We just configure the shell, and you can interact with the tools as you're supposed to. So you can use auto-completion, you can use other tools of the ecosystem like KNS. Yeah. And we also now have managed cloud provider resources for SSH access. This means that the cloud provider, the resources required for the SSH access are no longer controlled by Gardenctl, but there's a controller running that takes care of creating and deleting it. This prevents resource leakage. And we also now have dedicated SSH keys per session for the Bastion host access. Yeah. So now I hand over to Holger for the concepts.
Hello. So I want to explain a little bit the concept behind the implementation, because maybe this is important if you want to optimize the usage of Gardenctl for your own shell by creating some small scripts or whatever. And therefore you need to understand these basic concepts we have used. And first I want to explain how targeting works. Targeting is when you execute a Gardenctl target command, you change the target to a shoot cluster or seed or maybe the garden virtual cluster. And because you want to do something with this targeted cluster, for example, you want to execute kubectl and get the nodes of this cluster or whatever. And therefore, and this task is done by other command line tool, in this case, kubectl. And Gardenctl wants to very smoothly interact or build the bridge to use this CLI, this other CLI. And therefore, we have the concept of a session, because some of these commands need to create state. And in order to store this state, we need a kind of session concept. And therefore, it's mandatory that you have a session ID for each shell session. And this needs to be initialized if you are a Mac user, you already have a term session ID, which is the fallback. But if you don't have it, you should set a GCTL session ID in your shell profile. And Gardenctl then ensures that a corresponding temporary directory is created for this session, for this shell session, and all temporary state is then persisted in this shell session. And this is important that you do not, if you, for example, open a second tab, then you get a new shell session. And if you change then something, for example, if you change the namespace in the kubeconfig, then it's only in this one tab or window and not in the other one. So all the sessions are, from a state point of view, separated, and there is no overlap between. And so coming back to the target command, first of all changes in the session the target YAML, which has the information which is the targeted shoot cluster or seed cluster or whatever. And in addition, it automatically downloads the corresponding kubeconfig file into a temporary file. And this file name contains a hash, which is more or less the MD5 hash of the content of the kubeconfig file, in order to not again and again download the same and the same kubeconfigs. And it additionally creates a symbolic link, which has a stable name for this session, but always points to the current target kubeconfig. And with this, it is possible that you can also in your shell profile set the kubeconfig to the current session kubeconfig YAML symlink, and you don't have to change the kubeconfig environment variable anymore after you have changed the target, which was previously necessary. This means when you do a target command, your kubectl automatically points to the kubeconfig of the current target. And okay, this is for interaction with kubectl and targeting. Let's go to the next slide. One important requirement for Gardenctl was that we don't download kubeconfigs which contain credential or sensitive information, secret information. And on the right side, you see how a shoot kubeconfig currently looks like if you use Gardenctl-v2. And you see that this contains, first of all, at the bottom, you see that we have the user information uses exec plugin. And there, this exec plugin is Garden login, which is called by kubectl if a user executes a command, for example, like kubectl get nodes. Then kubectl finds out, okay, this user is not already authenticated, and calls this credential plugin, in our case, a Garden login. And when this call is done from kubectl, some additional information is passed, and this is passed in environment variable Kubernetes exec info, and this contains more or less the information in the kubeconfig. And the important part of the information which the Garden login plugin needs is the shoot reference and the cluster identity, because the Garden login plugin calls a sub-resource of the shoot cluster in the Garden cluster. And this sub-resource name is admin kubeconfig. And in order to do this request, we need this exec info, additional information. And then the sub-resource returns an admin kubeconfig request object to the Garden login plugin. And this more or less contains a client certificate, which is then stored in the cache and used by kubectl in order to do to authenticate to the API server of the cluster. And in the client certificate, the organization contains the group information and the common name contains the user information. And these certificates are very short-lived. They, per default, live only for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, they are expired, but this is configurable in Garden login. And therefore, I think we have a very secure mechanism for authentication to the clusters. Okay, let's go to the next slide. In the next slide, you see how we enable cloud provider CLIs like G-Cloud, AWS, or whatever, Ali Cloud or Azure or whatever. So wherever your cluster is, the hyperscaler where your cluster is created, because for some reasons you need to interact with these CLIs. And here I want to explain it, how we do it for G-Cloud, because for G-Cloud we cannot create or we cannot pass the credential information in an environment variable. So we have to do activate a service account for G-Cloud, or we have to do a login, and this stores the credentials on disk. And like we do it for kubectl, this information which we need to store on the disk is stored in the session directory again, which was already set up now. And for each cloud provider CLI, we create a corresponding folder in the session directory. For Azure, it's config Azure or config AZ. And this is created when you execute the provider env command, which is a subcommand of Gardenctl. So here I have, you see the alias penv, but the long name is provider env. And this creates this temporary directory, and this command generates a script. And this script you see on the right side. I'll explain how this script is created later. And this script you have to eval or source in your current shell, because the Gardenctl binary is not allowed or cannot change the environment of the host shell it's executed in. And therefore, it's a typical mechanism that we create a script, and this script you have to eval in order to configure your current shell session. And we support 4 types of shell. We support Bash, ZSH, Fish, and PowerShell currently. And this script then sets all environment variables and points the configuration directory of G-Cloud to this temporary directory. And then all the state of the G-Cloud interaction is stored in this session directory. And if you clean up the session, afterwards, all the information is gone. Okay, now let's come to the way how we generate these scripts, and therefore we use Go templates, and we have all the cloud providers we support. We have embedded templates in Gardenctl, and these templates are rendered and create the scripts, and the variables are filled in the template. But for example, if you now have a cloud provider which we do not support out of the box, or you want to change the behavior of this template, maybe you want to add an additional echo or want to execute an additional command, then you can override the templates in your Garden home directory, and therefore you have to put a template with the provider name, in this case GCP, and the extension temple in the templates folder in your Garden home directory. But you also can, if you have a new provider which we not support out of the box, you can add these new cloud providers in your home directory and open a issue, and then we can integrate it into Gardenctl directly. Okay, that's it from my side. Now Peter will give a demo and show you how to use the target and the P provider env commands in detail.
Yes, thanks, Holger. And I also will show you how to use Gardenctl to access the cluster nodes. Okay, now I exit the presentation and open the terminal. I'm prepared. And just prepare the upper right tab. We need that later. Don't bother about that now. So here I have created a new shell, and it's the only thing that that I had done is I installed previously Gardenctl. I have configured it already, and we can directly start with using Gardenctl, and later on, Lucas then will show you how to do that. So, and what I have in my bash profile is, so I'm using zshell. I have added the rc command, which Lucas will talk about, which will give me also the completions and aliases and so on. And in addition, I evaluated, or I called the kubectl-env command that Holger talked about previously, that points the kubeconfig environment variable to the current target. So when we run this here, it will print out the script. See here, export kubeconfig, and it points to the session directory, and here is the stable file. So this one will not change. This is the symlink, and this will point to the targeted kubeconfig. This file does not yet exist, but it doesn't matter. And as you can see here, this is the kube ps1 prompt. No kubeconfig is currently, or at least there is no file backing the symlink. And as I evaluate the script, also my kubeconfig environment variable is set. Okay, so let's first check out the Gardenctl help. So we have a description, and in this section here, you see all the available commands. We have a separate command when you only want to have the set up the completion, and but we recommend to use the rc command, which Lucas will talk about later. It already includes the completion part. Then we have a command to configure the Gardenctl. Also, Lucas will talk about that later. To help the kubectl-env command that we already saw. Then the provider env command that Holger talked about to configure the club provider CLIs. We have the SSH command, which I will show, and the target command to set the scope for the next operations, which I will now run. And also Holger talked about it briefly. So let's check the help for the target command. There are also different subcommands of the target command. You can target the garden, the project, the seed, a shoot, the control plane of a shoot. You can unset the target, and you can also view the current target. So let's view the current target. So in this demo, I will have more typing, but later Lucas will show you our aliases and how you can be more productive and quicker to see the stuff, because for these stuff we have aliases. And our target is currently empty. And what I will now do is, so there are different ways how to target a cluster. I can use, as you can see here in the examples above, I can use the flags. to target a cluster or project or whatever, or I can use the subcommands as shown here. And first I will target using flags, and then afterwards I will target using the subcommand, so you see both ways. So first I will target the garden, and we have auto completion also here for the gardens. You can press tab and it will complete it, and also for the projects we have auto completion, and also for the shoots, but I will not target the shoot now, just target the project. And as you can see now in my kubectl-v1 prompt, it switched. Now I have the garden cluster targeted, and the namespace that is set is for this project, for my project Gardenctl. And when I list the shoots here, I can directly use kubectl, and as we previously, or in the bash profile, I have pointed already the kubeconfig environment variable to the symlink. This already works, yeah, without issues. So next thing is I have the targeted the project, and we can also take a look at the target. You can view it, and it should contain the garden and the project. And now I want to target the shoot, tab, and I press tab, and I see all the shoots. As you can see here, I can select it, and I want to target this one here. Enter. Also here the prompt switched, and now I can see for that my shoot is targeted and the default namespace is selected. I can check the nodes of this cluster. Okay, we have 2. And now let's switch to the control plane. For this, we also have a command, as we previously saw, Gardenctl target control plane. Now I switched to the seed, and I'm within the namespace for my cluster, the control plane. We can check the pods, and we see the control plane pods running. And we could also manually target the seed and switch the namespace, but it's easier to just switch to the control plane when you have the shoot targeted. Then we also have the unset command, and this is what I will do now. We are currently targeting the control plane. Now I want to unset the control plane, and then I'm back at the shoot level. I unset the control plane. We can also check the target again, and yes, it just contains the garden, the project, and the shoot. Okay, then the next thing that I want to show you is the SSH command. And also here we have completion. I press tab, and then it will, give me a completion for the nodes. Press tab again, and then I can select the node for which that I want to debug. And before I hit enter, I want to talk about what's happening behind the scenes. And as Lucas previously mentioned, Gardenctl does not itself manage the infrastructure resources, but now we have a controller that takes care of that. And once I press enter, Gardenctl will create a bastion resource in the garden cluster. And in the top right corner here, I'm watching all the bastions. So then here the bastion will pop up, and the controller will start acting upon it. And it will create the necessary resources in the infrastructure, like, for example, the VM, or it will apply the security groups so that only I can access this bastion. And this bastion also will have, so Gardenctl will also create a temporary SSH key, and this SSH key will be, so SSH on this bastion will be configured that I can access it with this temporary SSH key. And I also want to show you the resources in the infrastructure provider account. And for this, we need to use the AWS CLI. And here I prepared a command to describe the instances. And we are now here in a new tab. So when I hit enter, this will not work because I haven't configured the AWS CLI. You will see there will be an error. And also we can check that the target is currently empty. So first I need to set up my target so that I have the same target as in this session. And later on in the Outlook, I will talk about what we planned about better session handling and reusing sessions and so on. But for now, I will just target the same shoot also in this tab. And I will use the provider env subcommand, which will print out the script that Holger talked about, which I will evaluate to configure the AWS CLI. And now, if I run the command again, I should see all the instances. And here, this is my AWS test worker. It has 2 nodes. We see 2 instances. And once I run the SSH command, we see another instance popping up for the bastion. Okay, I hit enter for the SSH command. So what happened? It auto detected my system's sitters or IPs. So what Gardenctl will do is it will ask a public service to echo out my IP. And we will add this to the bastion resource. The bastion resource, as you can see in the top right corner, it is now created. And as you can also see, the bastion also already has an IP assigned. And while this is running, Gardenctl will try to connect to the bastion. And once it's ready, it will then finally connect to it. And we can run the AWS command again to list the instances, and we should see the bastion now. Popping up, we see it, bastion here at the bottom, yeah. And it's already running, so it should succeed rather soon. Okay, so now I'm connected to this node that I specified here. When I now I can do whatever on this node, and when I exit it, then it will delete the bastion, and the controller will clean it up. The resources, and as you can see, it deleted the bastion. The finalizer is still there, and we should see that the bastion is shutting down. Yeah, and then finally it will be terminated. Okay, what I just showed you was I connected to one node using SSH, but my cluster has 2 nodes, and if I want to switch between the nodes using SSH, I can also just run the SSH command and hit enter without providing the node name. And as you can see here, it will again create the bastion resource. And once it's ready, we will see that Gardenctl will print out the command for SSH, so I can manually run the command. And then this is what I will do next. Then I will switch. First, I will connect to this node, and afterwards I will connect to this one. So just wait, and can also check here what's happening. Okay, the other one is already terminated. This one is running. Okay, what happened now is Gardenctl printed out the nodes and also the command to connect to them. So this is the command. You can copy it, and I will use this window because as long as this this command is running, I can access the nodes. And once I press Control C, Gardenctl will stop and the bastion will be removed. Okay, here I will have to replace the last part, the IP or host name. I take the first one. I can take either the IP or the host name. I take the IP. First one. Works. Exit. And then command. Take the second one. And it also works. Yep. And with this, I can quickly switch between the nodes. Okay, this yes, this was everything that I wanted to show in my demo, and now I hand over to Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So Peter already showed you how Gardenctl works if it's already configured and running. So I want to show you how to get started. Gardenctl relies on Garden login to authenticate, and we already saw this. So you need both tools installed. You would normally install it with a package manager, Brew for macOS or Unix systems, and Choco for Windows. You can also directly install it from GitHub, of course. Peter also talked about this startup script that we will now see in action. And also, I will show you how you configure your landscapes, basically your gardens. And an important thing here is that both tools, Garden Login and Gardenctl, need the garden configuration, but they can share the config file. So if you don't have a dedicated configuration file for Garden Login, it will automatically fall back to the Gardenctl version 2 config file. And you can edit this configuration file manually or just modify it using the config command. Okay, so I will give you now a demo how this is done, and I will show you how to install Gardenctl, how you use this rc command to add the startup script to your profile, and also how you can use the dashboard to target a cluster in Gardenctl. And last but not least, I will show you how you can customize targeting using patterns. Okay, so let's go to the terminal. I have here a clean installation where Garden Login is already installed, but there is no Gardenctl available. And also no configuration for either of the tools is present. As I already said, that you would normally install it using Brew, but as we currently do not have a release yet, on the release candidates, we will do it manually. And for this, we have an example for macOS here in our repository README, where you can see how it is done for macOS. If you have another operating system or other configuration, you probably need to adapt here. But for my use case now, I can just copy it and paste it here. It now downloads the file from GitHub and moves it into my path. So I need to enter my password. Okay, so it's now moved to my path, and I can already execute it. But now it's just installed, not configured, and there's also no completion available, and also no aliases created. So if I try to do something like G, it does not work, and it also would not work to do something like trying to use command completion and stuff like that. But what we can do is we can print out the help and see the command for the startup script here. Let's give us the help for this command. It says here that this command generates the startup script, and you can use it for different types of shells. So as we have set shell here, I will print out the help for set shell. And it tells me that if I want to have the startup script loaded for each session, I need to execute this command once. What it does is it will basically add the Gardenctl startup script to my set shell profile, so that it is loaded every time I create a new shell. So let's do this. Just create a new shell. Now the startup script is loaded, or should be loaded, and we can try it by typing G, and we see that we now have used our first alias for Gardenctl, and also the command completion should now be available. Yeah, I typed in con and get now the command completion for the config command. All right, so let's have a look at our config. So we see that as it is a clean installation, we currently do not have any gardens configured, so we cannot yet target something. So what we do first is we want to add a new garden.
Chris, can you maybe show quickly the output of this rc command?
Yeah, sure.
We have an impression what is done there.
Yeah, okay. You mean this here?
It just is in command without help now.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Okay, this is what is added to your, or executed every time you start a new shell. So this is for the command completion, and you see that we have different aliases created. G for Gardenctl, and also some aliases to quickly switch between control plane and cluster, and to target for targeting, and also for the kubectl env and provider env command, and also for viewing the current config and current target. And if you would add more aliases in the future, it would be automatically added to your list of aliases as we evaluate this script every time you start a new session. Okay, so where was I? Currently showing you that we do not have yet a garden configured. So do it again. We can also do, instead of typing gconfig u, we can type Gardenctl config u as a shortcut, as an alias. So to add a new garden, we could either now edit the configuration file, or we can do it with Gardenctl itself. We want to do it with Gardenctl, of course. So we use the config command, and see that we have the set garden command here, where we can add a new garden or configure an existing garden. And I've prepared a command to do this. So basically, we see here that we use the set garden command to add a new garden called sub-landscape-dev, and with the corresponding config file that I already have in my system. So we now added this garden to our configuration, and can have another look at our Gardenctl configuration and see that it's now added. Yeah, so basically, this is everything you need to do to get started with Gardenctl. And what I want to show you now is that how you would target a cluster using the Gardenctl and Gardener dashboard. So let's switch to Gardener dashboard. I have here a Gardener dashboard with some clusters, shoot clusters in my project. And I just take one of them. Let's take this one. And if I go to the detail page of this cluster, I can see that I have here in the access card commands to target the control plane or the cluster itself. And you see here already that these are Gardenctl version 2 commands. If you see here the old legacy commands, there's this configuration button where you can go to your account page and switch between the old commands for the old Gardenctl and the new ones. But this can be configured, or the default behavior can be configured by the landscape administrator. So for now, I will use the target cluster command and can also show it. It's basically the same thing that Peter already showed in his demo. It uses Gardenctl target command to target this cluster. I will copy it now and go back to my terminal and just paste it here. Okay, so it now targeted this cluster and it also printed me a warning. The reason for this is that Peter showed in his demo that he has this Gardenctl cube-env command added to his shell or to his profile, so that is executed every time he starts a new shell. As I haven't done this yet, I would need to do this manually once for this session, and I could either use the Gardenctl kubeconfig command, or I use the alias for this, and this is just GK. And you see that now my kubeconfig file points to, or is set to point to the Gardenctl generated config file kubeconfig, and you see that my garden or my shoot cluster is targeted. And if I now want to switch to the control plane of this cluster, I could do this by typing Gardenctl target control plane. But I can also use the alias for this, which is Gardenctl target control plane, so GTC. And I'm now inside the control plane of this cluster. And if I want to go back, I can just type GTC minus, and I switch back to the cluster. Okay, so now I showed you how to target using the dashboard. And last but not least, I want to show you how you can customize your targeting. And for this, we added the possibility to configure patterns for each garden in your configuration. So let's have a look at the configuration again. So right now, we see that there's one garden configured, and it has currently no pattern configured. But we will do this now. So you can add one or more patterns to each garden that allow you to customize how you add more ways of targeting for this garden. So what I want to show you now is how you would do this to add a pattern that allows you to target shoot clusters for this garden using the dashboard URL. So the dashboard URL here, that we can see here in our address bar, we want to add now a pattern that allows you to target using this URL. Okay, we will do this for this cluster here, for the GCP cluster. But in order to get this to work, we will first need to add a pattern for this. So I prepared also a command for this. Yeah, okay. Let's have a look. So I used again the set command here to modify my already configured garden and to add a new pattern. And this pattern is basically a regex that identifies this garden using the dashboard domain, and has capture groups for the namespace and the shoot, which will then be used to identify which shoot I want to target. So if I now copy this here, I will first show you, I will first drop our currently targeted or our current target. So let's do Gardenctl target unset garden.
Which is not necessary, but
it's not necessary, but I want to show that that we now have nothing targeted. And if you would have multiple multiple gardens configured, you could also switch to this shoot if you are currently in a different garden, because it's identified uniquely using the dev kls-ondemand.com domain, right? So let's do Gardenctl target and need to copy that again. Okay, so this is the dashboard domain for this cluster. And it's now, yeah, targeted. So if you now do Gardenctl target view, you see that I, yeah, targeted this cluster. And so this pattern targeting can be used to do all sort of things. We also have a capture group for the project name, and yeah, it can basically be used to do all kinds of yeah, of modifying the targeting command, so you can use it in your scripts or whatever. Yeah. Okay, that's it for my demos. Let's go back to the slides.
What kind of targets you can target by URL, like garden cluster, like shoots, seeds, or it is only for shoots?
It's you can target garden, the garden, then the project and the shoots. It's currently not for seeds, right, Peter?
yeah, we would need to edit if it's required or requested. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, the slides. So, okay, so I now hand over to Peter for the landscape requirements.
Yes, thanks, Lucas. So when you have your own gardener landscape and you have the role of the gardener administrator, you set everything up, and you or your user want to use Gardenctl, the version 2. There are some requirements for that so that it works, especially or only for the kube configs, for the shoot and for the seed kube configs. And as we talked about previously, we now use different kube configs and not the one. So the previous version of Gardenctl, it used the kube configs that were created during shoot creation, that contains the static admin credentials, and which made it harder to audit. So when some operator breaks something or so, it was hard to figure out who did it, because in the audit logs, there was just this admin user that did it. And now with the new kube configs for the shoots, where we use the Garden login kubectl plugin, we have these certificates that include the user that did something on the system. So we have now better audit ways to audit the stuff. Okay. So for the shoots, to create the shoot kube configs, we have a controller which is called Garden Login Controller Manager, which needs to run, and this one manages the Garden Login kube configs for the shoot. So whenever a new shoot is created, it will create also a corresponding kube config, and it will also clean it up after the shoot is gone. So this one needs to run. And for the seeds, there is no such thing. So you need to do that on your own. So you need to place a secret in the garden namespace for every seed. And the name of the seed is starts with the seed name and is suffixed with .login. And Gardenctl, then when you either switch to the control plane of a shoot, or if you directly target the seed, it will look out for such a secret and it will download it. And that's why we say, and this is also how we do it for our internal landscapes, the kube config should not contain any credentials, which means you configure, you use OpenID Connect or whatever. So yeah, and also then it can be audited. So these are the requirements. And on the next slide, we give an outlook on what we have planned, and also what feedback we got. And one thing we heard is that it would be nice to have a target history, so that you can see what you had targeted previously, and you can select it then. So this feature was already there in V1, and it would be nice if we also would have it in V2. The next thing as feedback that we got is and I also mentioned it during my demo, is the session handling. So in my demo, on the left side had, in one tab, I had targeted a shoot cluster, and in the other tab, I wanted to attach to the session so that I have the same cluster targeted. Of course, I could use the history command, but using such a session command, I would see the sessions, and I could then clone or attach to the session. I have the target file is there, and everything else that was set up during the other session would be there. And we would also add a cleanup command for the session. So then you could add this cleanup. You would execute the cleanup, or in your or you would add a command in your bash profile to run the cleanup. So like Gardenctl session cleanup -- after 7 days or 2 days, and then it will clean up the sessions. They are automatically cleaned up when you restart your computer, because we place the session in the temporary directory, but it would also be nice if this would be done, for example, when you open a new session, because you have it in your bash profile. And we also have some other enhancement requests opened in our Gardenctl-v2 repository. You can check it out, and if you have other ideas, either speak up here in this meeting, we can talk about it, or open an issue on our repository. And with that, we are done with our meeting. Thank you for participating and listening. And I hand over to Jessica.
Yes, thank you so much. Are there any questions in the audience? We have a whole minute left.
Oh, that's bad for the question part. Yeah.
I just had one question. Thanks for the demo. I started using it since yesterday, and it's awesome. So it works like magic. I saw that you created the SSH, and the expectation is you have to do Control-C, and then it will remove the version. What happens if it's force killed, or your session expires?
Yeah. Good question. So as long as Gardenctl either has the session open, or you just run the Gardenctl SSH command, it will stay alive, and it will then run a heartbeat on the Bastion resource. And if this heartbeat doesn't come anymore, and after, I don't know, an hour or so, this one will be automatically cleaned up by the controller.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. You can also see it here. This one, I still have it open from my demo. This is the Bastion resource. You can see here the heartbeat. The last one was 2 minutes ago, and if now the heartbeat will not come again, it will expire in 57 minutes. Yeah.
I have a quick question as well. So first of all, thanks for that tool. It's really great, and I'm using it as well already. In your demo, Peter, you showed that targeting directly applied the kubeconfig, whereas for Lucas, this was not yet the case. Is that a new feature, or is that
this is a new feature? I guess we haven't explicitly mentioned it, but yesterday we created a new release candidate, and this one includes this feature.
Yes, and just to make this clear, so we use the same version of Gardenctl, but the difference is that Peter has added this kubeenv command in addition to this, to the RC command in his bash or set as shell profile, right? So so you would also need to do this only once if you don't have added it, and you would get this warning so that you're reminded to do it. But if you want to have it every time, then automatically done, then you need to also add it to your.
We also still support the old behavior.
Yeah.
So it's in the configuration, you can link kubeconfig true and false. The default is to link it, but your feedback is welcome if you prefer it to the automatic behavior like we have presented, or if you want to do it explicitly. But we think automatic is better.
Yeah, it's the 99% use case for me, so automatic will help me. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions right now, I'm sure if anything comes up, our presenters are welcome to answer anything you have. Just reach out. And if you want to show something that you did, reach out to me, then we can schedule you for the next community call. And with that, thank you so much for attending and presenting, and see you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.